I want to start a series on the book of Jonah. And I mean, I think it's an interesting study, and I hope everyone here gets a kick out of it as well. It's only 4 chapters, and I think my outline is only about 17 pages long. So 3 Sundays, maybe 3, 4, probably maybe 4 at the max. I don't think it'll go any longer than that. But we I don't think I've done an Old Testament thing since the Elijah thing that I did way back when. So we're gonna take a look at Jonah. Now, by means of introduction, the historicity of the book of Jonah is questioned by a lot of people. A lot of people just don't believe that it's real. I went into the internet and asked the question, what denominations teach that the events in Jonah are historically accurate? I just asked that question in Google, okay? And this is what I got. Christian denominations that hold a literal interpretation of the Bible, such as many evangelical and Catholic churches, often teach that the events in the book of Jonah are historically accurate. However, it's important to note some denominations view Jonah as a parable or allegory conveying important truths without being a literal historical account. The Catholic Church allows for both interpretations. Of course they do. Recognizing the possibility of the story being either literal history or didactic fiction. Some scholars, even within denominations that emphasize historical accuracy, see the miraculous elements as secondary to the theological message of God's grace and mercy. Arguments for the historicity of Jonah often include Jonah being a historical prophet, mentioned in 2 Kings 14:25. We're going to look at that verse in a few minutes. Jesus' reference to Jonah and the great fish in Matthew 12:38 and 41, which some interpret as an affirmation of its historicity. The book of Jonah presenting itself as a historical narrative with specific details. Arguments against a strictly historical interpretation often point to the exaggerated and miraculous nature of some events, like Jonah being swallowed by a large fish, the lack of external historical records corroborating the mass repentance of Nineveh, the possibility that the book was written later as a didactic story with historical and national implications. Ultimately, the understanding of Jonah as historical or allegorical is a matter of interpretation and theological perspective within different denominations and individual beliefs. So that's what Google says, or AI says about it. Now you're going to hear what I have to say about it. I believe it's absolutely, totally accurate and historical, and it happened. I believe Jonah got swallowed by a whale and stayed in there for 3 days and 3 nights. If he didn't, then it tends to point to the idea that Jesus Christ is a liar. And I ain't going there, folks. So we'll go over we're going to go over several points of this. Now, the first thing I want to flip to is the passage that I just read, or I just quoted, that I said we were going to look at in a minute, and that's found over in 2 Kings chapter 14, beginning at verse 23. In the 15th year of Amaziah, the son of Joash, king of Judah, Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel, began to reign in Samaria and reigned 41 years. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord. He departed not from all the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, who made Israel to sin. He restored the coast of Israel from the entering of Hamath to the sea of the plain, according to the word of the Lord of Israel, which he spake by the hand of his servant Jonah, the son of Amittai, the prophet, which was of Gath-hepher. For the Lord saw the affliction of Israel, that it was very bitter, for there was not any shut up, nor any left, nor any helper for Israel. And the Lord said not that he would blot out the name of Israel from under heaven, but he saved them by the hand of Jeroboam, the son of Joash. Here we have a mention of Jonah, the son of Amittai, right, from Gath-hepher. That's going to be important in a minute. So Jonah was a prophet. He did not just deal with Nineveh. He had been sent to Israel at another time. So he's mentioned in other places, and this is the record of his prophetic ministry to Israel during the reign of Jeroboam II, who was the son of Joash. And his prophecy was one of salvation for Israel. Now, the other passage that they mentioned is found over in Matthew chapter 12. And this is where the Lord Jesus Christ considered Jonah and his experience to be history. Matthew chapter 12, beginning at verse 38. Then certain of the scribes and of the Pharisees answered, saying, Master, we would see a sign from thee. But he answered and said unto them, An evil and adulterous generation seeketh after a sign, and there shall no sign be given to it, but the sign of the prophet Jonas. For as Jonas was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. The men of Nineveh shall rise in judgment with this generation and shall condemn it, because they repented at the preaching of Jonas, and behold, a greater than Jonas is here. So Christ refers to Jonah going to Nineveh, which is what the book of Jonah is all about. And so if Christ, God manifest in the flesh, believes this is a historical story, then folks, that's good enough for me. It's a historical story. And it's not some allegory. To reject it, again, is to make Christ a liar. So you might as well deny the resurrection of Jesus Christ as to deny the experience of Jonah in the whale's belly. Okay? This book is written as a historical account of actual happenings, things that actually happened. It is nowhere in the Bible presented as fiction. Nowhere does the Bible call this book fiction. And it's important, a couple of passages. Look first at Philippians chapter 4 and verse 8. Because the Apostle Paul teaches us a few things that, or commands us a couple of things that we need to consider here. In Philippians chapter 4 and verse 8, he says, Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue, if there be any praise, think on these things, not fables. Think on things that are good. Now, and then we're told by him in 1 Timothy chapter 4 or chapter 1 and verse 4. He says, neither give heed to fables and endless genealogies. We're not to pay attention to fables. So if Jonah is a fable, why in the world is it in the Bible when we're not supposed to even think about those kind of things? We're to think on things that are honest. So is the book of Jonah honest? Well, if it's history, it is. If it's a fable, it's not, and it doesn't belong in the Bible. At least according to Paul. Now, World Book Encyclopedia says that a large sperm whale could probably swallow a man, but a man could not live in a whale's stomach for more than a few seconds even if he had not already been crushed to death. So that's what World Book Encyclopedia says. Romans chapter 3 and verse 4 says, let God be true, but every man a liar. And that includes World Book Encyclopedia. There's a bunch of explanations that have been fabricated to try to explain away this story. Some say that Jonah had a dream. As we're going to see, he gets on a boat and he goes down and goes to sleep on the boat. So they say that while he was asleep, he dreamed this thing and then wrote about his dream. Okay, that's one explanation of it. Some say that Jonah was picked up after the storm that they end up in and was shipwrecked by a boat that had a fish on the front of it for a figurehead. You know how these old sailing vessels, most of them had women on the front of the boat. Some of them had whatever god it was that these people tended to pray to, and so this one had a fish on it, and so that's how they explain it. Others claim that a dead fish was floating around, and Jonah jumped on top of it, and that's what saved him from the storm. Why don't they just accept the story as fact? Well, because they don't believe the Bible. And that's pretty easy. You find somebody that wants to turn this into an allegory. You found somebody that doesn't believe what God said. It's that simple. So if they don't believe what he said there, chances are they don't believe what he said somewhere else as well. They just don't believe him. Now, we're told, and we'll see this in a few minutes, that God had prepared a great fish to swallow up Jonah. The Lord could make a fish in such a way to sustain a man inside of him for 3 days and 3 nights. He could do that. God could make a fish that had a condominium in the middle of it, so that when you got swallowed, you got a colored TV set and a refrigerator and all the amenities that you need to survive for 3 days and 3 nights. It wasn't just your ordinary fish swimming around out in the ocean. It was prepared by God for the specific purpose of swallowing Jonah and partially teaching him a lesson and partially saving him from drowning, which is an interesting thought. Mark 10 and verse 27 says, with God, all things are possible. So God prepared a fish for him. The events of the book are believed to have occurred between 800 and 750 BC, which would be at the height of the Assyrian Empire. The Assyrians were some of the most bloodthirsty, violent people that have ever roamed the earth. And that's well known in history. And they were one of the world empires. They were the world empire after Egypt. And then Nebuchadnezzar destroyed them. Babylon took them over. And the city of Nineveh, which we're going to read a lot about in this book, is located in modern day northern Iraq. So Babylon is in Iraq, so was Nineveh. It's just a little bit farther north. So, I mean, if you were to look at a map, it would be up in northern Iraq. Interestingly enough, the name Jonah is a Hebrew word that means dove. And the dove characterizes God's messenger. Look at Matthew chapter 10 and verse 16. Behold, I send you forth as sheep in the midst of wolves. Be ye therefore wise as serpents and harmless as doves. So this characterizes him. And Jonah behaved kind of like a dove. David said this. Look at Psalm chapter 55. verses 6 through 8. And I said, oh, that I had wings like a dove, for then I would fly away and be at rest. Lo, then would I wander off and remain in the wilderness, Selah. Which is kind of what Jonah, as we're going to see, kind of did. Now, another point, something that we saw over in 2 Kings chapter 14. Jonah was from Gath-Hepher, or Gath-Hepher, however you say it. And we saw that in 2 Kings 14. Gath-Hepher is in the land of Zebulon. Okay? Look at Joshua chapter 19. Joshua 19, beginning at verse 10. And the third lot, this is when they're dividing up the land, the third lot came up for the children of Zebulun according to their families, and the border of their inheritance was unto Sardid. And their border went up toward the sea, and Maralah, and reached to Dabbasheth, and reached unto the river that is before Jokneam, and turned from Sarda eastward toward the sun rising unto the border of Christloth Tabor, and then goeth up to Da-erah, and goeth up to Japhiah, and from thence passed along the east coast. So here are the borders of this land, okay? The land of Zebulon, okay? Now look at Matthew chapter 4. Verses 12 through 16. Now when Jesus had heard that John was cast into prison, he departed into Galilee. And leaving Nazareth, he came and dwelt in Capernaum, which is upon the seacoast, in the borders of Zebulun and Nephthalim, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by Isaiah the prophet, saying, the land of Zebulun and the land of Nephthalim by the way, the sea beyond Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. The people which sat in darkness saw great light, and to them which sat in the region shadow of death, light is sprung up. Zebulun is part of Galilee. That's where it's located at. So Jonah is from Galilee. Okay? And you say, okay, so what's that got to do with the price of corn? Well, Jesus likened himself to Jonah, right? We just read that over in Matthew chapter 12, beginning of verse 38. For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in a whale's belly, so shall the Son, right? Okay. Both of these prophets arose from Galilee. Both Jesus Christ and Jonah came from Galilee. Look at Matthew chapter 2. Verses 22 and 23. But when he heard that Archelaus did reign in Judea in the room of his father Herod, he was afraid to go thither, notwithstanding being warned of God in a dream. He turned aside into the parts of Galilee, and he came and dwelt in a city called Nazareth, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophets, he shall be called a Nazarene. Okay, this was Joseph. This is Jesus' family. They came out of Egypt and went to Galilee. So Jesus is from Galilee. Look at Matthew 4, beginning at verse 12. Now when Jesus had heard that we just read this. So Jesus is from Galilee. Jonah is from Galilee. And again, you're probably wondering, what's this got to do with anything? Well, look at John chapter 7 and verse 52. And we're going to talk about the leaders of the Jews. The religious leaders of the day. The ones that claimed that they knew the Bible better than anyone else. In John chapter 7 and verse 52, they say, they answered and said unto him, Art thou also of Galilee? Search and look, for out of Galilee ariseth no prophet. Well, I can name two. Jesus Christ and Jonah. Once again, they had no understanding of just the basic facts. Okay, that brings us to chapter 1 of Jonah. So let's turn to Jonah chapter 1, and we'll begin by reading. We're going to read the whole chapter, and then we'll just I'll start making points from there. Now the word of the Lord came unto Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and cry against it, for their wickedness is come up before me. But Jonah rose up to flee unto Tarshish from the presence of the Lord, and went down to Joppa, and he found a ship going to Tarshish, so he paid the fare thereof, and went down into it to go with them unto Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. But the Lord sent out a great wind into the sea, and there was a mighty tempest in the sea, so that the ship was like to be broken. Then the mariners were afraid, and cried every man unto his God, and cast forth the wares that were in the ship into the sea to lighten it of them. But Jonah was gone down into the sides of the ship, and he lay and was fast asleep. So the shipmaster came to him, and said unto him, What meanest thou, O sleeper? I get a kick out of that every time I read it. O sleeper, arise and call upon thy God, if so be that God will think upon us, that we perish not. And they said every one to his fellow, Come and let us cast lots, that we may know for whose cause this evil is upon us. So they cast lots, and the lot fell upon Jonah. Then said they unto him, Tell us, we pray thee, for whose cause this evil is upon us? What is thine occupation, and whence comest thou? What is thy country, and of what people art thou? And he said unto them, I am an Hebrew, and I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, which hath made the sea and the dry land. Then were the men exceedingly afraid, and said unto him, Why hast thou done this? For the men knew that he fled from the presence of the Lord, because he had told them. Then said they unto him, What shall we do unto thee, that the sea may be calm unto us? For the sea wrought and was tempestuous. And he said unto them, Take me up and cast me forth into the sea, so shall the sea be calm unto you. For I know that for my sake this great tempest is upon you. Nevertheless, the men rowed hard to bring it to the land, but they could not, for the sea wrought and was tempestuous against them. Wherefore they cried unto the Lord and said, We beseech thee, O Lord, we beseech thee, let us not perish for this man's life, and lay not upon us innocent blood, for thou, O Lord, hast done as it pleased thee. So they took up Jonah and cast him forth into the sea, and the sea ceased from her raging. Then the men feared the Lord exceedingly, and offered a sacrifice unto the Lord, and made vows. Now the Lord had prepared a great fish to swallow up Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. So that's the first chapter. Now let's look at a couple of points. Jonah was the son of Amittai, which is a Hebrew word which means faithful or truthful. The book immediately introduces us to a man that suggests trustworthy testimony. And yet, this happens to be the book that everybody decides isn't trustworthy. The Holy Spirit of truth appeared like a dove or like a Jonah upon Christ, right? Jonah is the word for dove. Look at John chapter 1. Keep your fingers in Jonah, or put a marker there, because we're going to be coming back to it. But John chapter 1. And verse 32. And John bare record, saying, I saw the Spirit descending from heaven like a Jonah, like a dove, and it abode upon him. And verses 14 through 17, or I'm sorry, chapter 14 and verse 17. Even the Spirit of truth, whom the world cannot receive, because it seeth him not, neither knoweth him, but ye know him, for he dwelleth with you and shall be in you. So the Holy Spirit of truth, this dove, Jonah's father's name refers to the faithfulness of it. And I just find it interesting that the idea that the Spirit of truth, starting off with the book of Jonah at the very beginning, Jonah being the dove, his father being faithful, and yet this is the book that they decide is unfaithful and is a fable. Now, what we read here is that the word of the Lord came unto Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and cry against it, for their wickedness has come up before me. This is a call to preach. Jonah's being called to preach, to go to Nineveh and preach to these Gentiles. He's being sent to a heathen Gentile nation, an enemy of Israel, who eventually wipes out the northern 10 tribes of Israel. And he's being sent to that city, one of the most bloodthirsty, violent people that have ever lived on planet Earth. Jonah, I want you to go out there and tell these people, well, the message that he's got to deliver. You got 40 days and God's going to destroy you if you don't repent. That could almost make you shake in your boots a little bit, couldn't it? I mean, think about it. You got to go by can't you send a friend with me? Do I have to go by myself? You can't. Don't you have any other preachers out here? Can't we get 50 of them and we'll all go split up the city into little bits? This is a huge city. I got to go do the whole thing by myself to people that I don't even want to be in the same room with these people. They hate the Jews. And God sends him right into the middle of this. I mean, there is an aspect of this where you might think maybe Jonah wasn't that dumb getting on a boat. You know, I mean, you can understand maybe what's going on in his mind. It's kind of like when God sent Elijah to talk to Ahab and Jezebel. These are not kind, sweet people, folks. These are rulers of the world that are used to getting their way. They're not used to having some preacher show up telling them to clean up their act. But that was the job. So, and Nineveh was the capital of the Assyrian Empire. Look at 2 Kings. Chapter 19 and verse 36. So Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departed and went and returned and dwelt at Nineveh. So this is where the king lives. He's being sent to Nineveh. This is the capital of the Assyrian Empire. You know, it's an interesting point. God doesn't usually send his ministers to places where they're familiar or known. You ever notice that? Pastor Mott grew up in Jacksonville, Florida, and he's a pastor of the Detroit church and been up there for 50 years almost. Pastor Gerald grew up in Alabama and ended up, his longest pastorate was in Las Vegas, Nevada. I'm from Southern California and my pastorate is here. Pastor Boffey came from Canada and he pastors a church in Cincinnati. Jonah got sent to Nineveh, of all places. Over in Mark chapter 6 and verse 4, it says, a prophet is not without honor, but in his own country and among his own kin and in his own house. I think God does it this way because we all, as we're going to see in this study, and I'll say it now, I'm going to say it a bunch of other times, sometimes God's ministers do some pretty foolish things. And especially prior to being called to preach, we all have a history back there, and it's probably best if we're not around it. If we're not around a bunch of folks that remember us when we were this big and just the little foolish kid that was running around, it's probably best. It's a tough thing for people that know you well to then accept you as a pastor. It's a rough one because they knew you when you were just the little kid. And now all of a sudden you're the pastor. That's a tough one to cross. And God tends to send folks out like that. As I've already said, the Assyrian Empire was the world empire that preceded Babylon. And it's been noted in history and secular history as well as in the Bible for their warlike and violent character. Let's look at a couple of passages. Look at Isaiah chapter 10. Beginning at verse 5. O Assyrian, the rod of mine anger and the staff in their hands is mine indignation. I will send him against a hypocritical nation, and against the people of my wrath will I give him a charge to take the spoil and to take the prey and to tread them down like the mire of the streets. Howbeit he meaneth not so, neither doeth his heart think so, or doth his heart think so, but it is in his heart to destroy and cut off nations, not a few. For he saith, are not my princes altogether kings? Is not Calno as Carchemish, and is not Hamath as Arphad? Is not Samaria as Damascus? As my hand hath found the kingdoms of the idols, and whose graven images did excel them of Jerusalem and of Samaria? Shall I not, as I have done unto Samaria and her idols, so do to Jerusalem and her idols? Wherefore it shall come to pass that when the Lord hath performed his whole work upon Mount Zion and upon Jerusalem, I will punish the fruit of the stone heart of the king of Assyria and the glory of his high looks. God uses this heathen king to destroy the northern kingdoms. And it's in his heart to do this. He has no problem doing this. This is good. Now, he didn't plan it this way, but he got used to do it and started thinking, well, maybe I should take Jerusalem as well. Well, no, you went too far. You get the northern 10 tribes. You don't get Jerusalem. I'm going to deal with them later. I'll deal with them with Nebuchadnezzar. But the king of Assyria, they were a violent people. In Nahum chapter 3 and verse 1, which is just a little bit past Jonah. Woe to the bloody city, it is all full of lies and robbery, the prey departeth not. And this is referring to Nineveh. This is a prophecy referring to Nineveh, the bloody city. They were a violent folks. And Jonah's called to cry against them because their wickedness has come up before God. The word cry means shouting, calling in a loud voice, uttered with effort. So this is not going to be a soft, smooth, self-affirming message that Jonah is going to deliver to these people. He's to cry against them. And clearly, God could see their sin. Sin's not hidden before God. Even if you think you're getting away with it, it's not hidden. He knows it. Turn first to Genesis chapter 18, verses 20 and 21. And the Lord said, because the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grievous, I will go down now and see whether they have done altogether according to the cry of it, which has come unto me, and if not, I will know. You see, and we know what happened to Sodom and Gomorrah. It was destroyed. In Revelation chapter 18 and verse 5, we read, for her sins, this is a mystery, Babylon the Great, for her sins have reached unto heaven, and God hath remembered her iniquities. So God knows about this. So God goes to Jonah, tells him to go to Nineveh, and Jonah disobeys the call. He states his reason for his disobedience over in Jonah chapter 4 and verse 2, where he says, and he prayed unto the Lord and said, I pray thee, O Lord, was not this my saying when I was yet in my country? Therefore I fled before unto Tarshish, for I knew that thou art a gracious God and merciful, slow to anger, and of great kindness, and repentest thee of the evil. Jonah was afraid that God would show mercy to the Ninevites. And he didn't want him to show mercy to the Ninevites. He wanted them destroyed. This is our enemy. You want me to go help them, and then you're going to show mercy to them and let them off the hook? I think I'm going to go to Tarshish. I'm going to get my phone out and call Uber, see if I can get a ride. He didn't want God to spare this heathen nation. This nation was a threat to his own people. He didn't want God to spare them. It was kind of like God was asking Jonah to go sign his own and his nation's death warrant. So he fled the presence of the Lord. One commentator, a guy by the name of G. Campbell Morgan, said this: a passion for righteousness which makes us vindictive and incapable of forgiveness, even in the case of those as cruel as Nineveh, puts us out of fellowship with God. And it put Jonah out of fellowship with God. Now, it says that he fled from God to go to Tarshish. Did he really think he could outrun him? Do you think this man of God really thought that he could outrun God? And Tarshish is, it's believed that Tarshish is in Spain, modern day Spain, which would be at that time about as far as you could get. The only thing past Spain is the Atlantic Ocean. So that's about as far as man had, that was it. He's going as far as he can get away from the direction of where he's being sent. And he's going to soon discover something. If you look over at Psalm chapter 139, he's going to soon discover something that we all need to always keep in mind, and that is you can't escape God. No matter how you try, you're not going to be able to escape him. 139, beginning at verse 7. Whither shall I go from thy spirit? Or whither shall I flee from thy presence? If I ascend up into heaven, thou art there. And if I make my bed in hell, behold, thou art there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there shall thy hand lead me, and thy right hand shall hold me. If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, even the night shall be light about me. Yea, the darkness hideth not from thee, but the light shineth as the day. The darkness and the light are both alike to thee. Where can you go and get away from God? You can't. He's everywhere. But, like I said, sometimes God's ministers do foolish things. And this is foolish thing number one, trying to run away from the call. Now, we're told in 2 Chronicles, chapter 9 and verse 21, for the king's ships went to Tarshish with the servants of Huram. Every 3 years once came the ships of Tarshish, bringing gold and silver, ivory, and apes and peacocks. I don't know what they were going to do with the apes, but who knows? But it was a commercial center. It's mentioned also over in Ezekiel chapter 27. Oops, 27. Ezekiel 27 and verse 12. Tarshish was thy merchant by reason of the multitude of all kind of riches, with silver, iron, tin, and lead they traded in their fairs. So it was a commercial center. And Jonah goes down and he finds this boat. And it's interesting. People tend to flee to where the money is when they're running away from the will of God. That just tends to be that seems to be what draws them. When they're going to run away, they go to where they can make a good buck. And that's an example that we've got. Well, look at 1 Timothy chapter 6. Verses 10 and 11. For the love of money is the root of all evil, which while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. But thou, O man of God, flee these things and follow after righteousness, godliness, faith, love, patience, meekness. You see, if you're going to get outside the will of God, that tends to be one of the things that will pull you in that direction. Look at Genesis chapter 13, and let's look at the example of Lot. You know, they had gotten to a point where Abraham and his family and Lot and his family, they'd gotten so large that it was time to divide things up. And Abraham basically said, You pick the direction you want to go, and we'll take the other. We'll take the other. Okay? And over in Genesis chapter 13, beginning at verse 10, and Lot lifted up his eyes and beheld all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as thou comest unto Zoar. Now think about this. You got a bunch of animals that need to eat grass, and you look out here and you find the best land that you can possibly find. Isn't that the same as running after the bucks? In an agricultural area, yeah, of course. You're going to be able to raise more cattle, right? What does Lot do when he sees this? It says, then Lot chose him all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated themselves the one from the other. And pretty soon, Lot ends up right in the gate of the city, right there in Sodom. And remember what happened to his witness. Remember what happened to his family. Not a great story. But Jonah's doing the same thing. I'm going to flee from God, and I'm going to where the money is. Now it says that let's get back to Jonah again here. Verse 3 of chapter 1 of Jonah. But Jonah rose up to flee unto Tarshish from the presence of the Lord, and went down to Joppa. And he found a ship going to Tarshish. So he paid the fare thereof, and went down into it, to go with them unto Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. So he finds a ship. It's interesting that to avoid preaching the gospel to the Gentiles, he goes to the very place where Cornelius was told to send someone to collect Peter, so that Peter could come back and preach the gospel to the Gentiles. Remember, Peter was in Joppa at the time when Cornelius sent for him. And we see this over in Acts chapter 10, verses 4 through 6. And when he looked on him, he was afraid and said, What is it, Lord? And he said unto him, Thy prayers and thine alms are come up for a memorial before God. Now send men to Joppa, and call for one Simon, whose surname is Peter. He lodgeth with one Simon, a tanner, whose house is by the seaside. He shall tell thee what thou oughtest to do. So the very same place. Jonah gets down to Joppa, which is on the coast of the Mediterranean, and he finds this boat. He had the fare to pay the passage, and so he gets on the boat. Now, circumstances seem to favor him, and this is something that I want to point out to folks. I've had discussions with folks dealing with when doors open and when doors close, and providence, and how that works. But there's something we have to remember. Just because a door opens does not necessarily mean it's divine providence. It could be something else. The question is, does it match with the precepts in the Bible? Does it line up with what God says? If it lines up with what God says, well, then you can be pretty well assured that it's providence. If it doesn't, then probably not. So maybe that's a door you don't want to walk through. Okay? Judge it by the scriptures. And we have a couple here that just moved recently from Texas. So I'm going to pick on them for a minute. So they were looking to, I talked to them. I said, hey, you know what? Put your resume out there and see if a door opens. Now, their move here, was it in agreement with what God says? Yeah. Yeah, God wants his people in the church. So their reason for coming here was to be closer to the church. So a door opens, they walk through the door. It lines up with the scriptures. What if they had have decided, you know what, how about if we go to Hawaii? Let's move to Hawaii. There's no church in Hawaii. Not that we know of. You're farther away from the church than you were when you were in Texas. The chances of you getting to church are even slimmer, but what if a door opens? Is that providence? Probably not. So you want to make sure that the door you're going to walk through lines up. If you've got a commandment from God, don't go against the commandment like Jonah did and think that because the circumstances look perfect, God must be in this. Jonah was fleeing from trying to get away from the call to preach, running away as far as he could go. God's not going to open that door. Somebody else might. Now God will use it, and Jonah will pay the price for it, as we're going to see. But you just have to be careful on the providence thing. The ready way is not always the right way. Some open doors lead to elevator shafts. So you got to make sure that you know that it lines up, that this door that's opening for me lines up with what God says. And if it does, then you can pretty well rest assured that God's in it and you should walk through it. If it doesn't, if that door that's open goes contrary to what God says, then avoid going through that door. You might find yourself at the bottom of a pit. Now, it's easier to go downhill than it is to go uphill, and Jonah's downward progression, we start to see this in verses 3 and 5. We just read 3 when he's going away. In verse 5 it says, "Then the mariners were afraid and cried every man unto his God, and cast forth the wares that were in the ship into the sea to lighten it of them. But Jonah was gone down into the sides of the ship, and he lay and was fast asleep." Jonah's unwillingness, by the way, did not exempt him from his call to preach. God called him to preach, and he ran away from it. But that doesn't get him out of it. It doesn't get him out of what he's supposed to do. He's called to do this. Look at 1 Corinthians chapter 9. Verses 16 and 17. "For though I preach the gospel, I have nothing to glory of, for necessity is laid upon me. Yea, woe is unto me if I preach not the gospel. For if I do this thing willingly, I have a reward. But if against my will, a dispensation of the gospel is committed unto me, I still got to do it. Now I can do it willingly, and I get a reward, or I can do it unwillingly and not, but I'm still going to have to do it. When God calls a man to preach, he means go preach. You don't get out of it. You get drafted, and you can either accept it and do it willingly, or you can fight it. The old saying, there's an easy way and there's a hard way. Pick one and Jonah decided to pick the hard way, it didn't get him out of it. As we're going to see, it did not get him out of the call. He still had to end up in Nineveh. He still had to go preach to the Ninevites. Even though he ran away, that was temporary. He still had to fulfill his call. And a reluctance to comply with God's call to service, it makes the Lord mad. Look at Exodus chapter 4. Verses 10 through 14. This is Moses trying to argue with God, because God calls Moses, and Moses tries to come up with every reason that he can think of not to take the call. He says, and Moses said unto the Lord, O my Lord, I am not eloquent, neither heretofore nor since thou hast spoken unto thy servant, but I am slow of speech and of slow tongue. I stammer. I can't do this. You go get somebody else. I'm not going to be any good for you. And the Lord said unto him, Who hath made man's mouth? Or who maketh the dumb or deaf, or the seeing, or the blind? Have I not the Lord? Now therefore go, and I will be with thy mouth, and teach thee what thou shalt say. And he said, O my Lord, send, I pray thee, by the hand of him whom thou wilt silt. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses. And he said, Is not Aaron the Levite thy brother? I know that he can speak well. And also, behold, he cometh forth to meet thee. And when he seeth thee, he will be glad in his heart. So here Moses trying to talk his way out of it. Here God sends Aaron with him. There, the argument's done. Now, what's your next argument? Okay? God doesn't like it when he calls a man to do the work and the man says, yeah, I think you need to call somebody else. It'll make him mad, just like it did with Jonah. And so, this is a book. This book is a warning to all that might get the call of God. Pay attention to Jonah. If God calls you to work, don't go look for a ship that'll take you to Tarshish. Don't try to run away from him. Remember Jonah. Now, we're told in verse 4 of Jonah chapter 1, But the Lord sent out a great wind into the sea, and there was a mighty tempest in the sea, so that the ship was like to be broken. The ship was likely to. That means it was reasonably expected to, likely to. In other words, this storm was likely to take this ship apart. So, pretty healthy storm. And you know what? This demonstrates God's sovereignty over the weather. Look at Psalm 148. And verse 8. Fire and hail, snow and vapor, stormy wind, fulfilling his word. You know, we sometimes think, foolishly, that God can't help us with our problems. And yet, he controls everything. He controls the weather. He controls the storms. He's in control of it all, and he can't help me with my piddly little problem because I'm 3 cents short and paying for the cornflakes I had to go buy. And we all do this, folks. I know I do. I have those moments. So I'm assuming that you all have those moments as well, that something pops up and you think this is too big for him. Folks, nothing's too big for him. Nothing is too big for him. If he can control this storm, he can certainly take care of me finding a gas station when I'm running low on fuel. But we sometimes do that. And safety, for one of God's children, safety is found somewhere, and it's found in obedience. Look at Proverbs chapter 1 and verse 33. If Jonah wanted to be safe, if his fear was having to go before the Ninevites, and he was afraid of doing that for whatever reason, running from it is not where you're going to be safe. Obedience is where you're going to be safe. Proverbs 1 and verse 33 says, "But whoso hearkeneth unto me shall dwell safely and shall be quiet from fear of evil." Obedience is where safety. So Jonah is a lot safer going to Nineveh and doing what God told him to do rather than running away from him. Now it says that during the storm, Jonah lay fast asleep. In the old Catholic version of the Bible, the Douay-Rheims, there's a footnote on Jonah chapter 1 and verse 5. It says, "This is a lively image of the insensibility of sinners, fleeing from God and threatened on every side with his judgments, yet sleeping as if they were secure." Do we not see that? And yeah, of course. And one of the things that sin tends to lull men into is this sense of insensitivity to God. That's why we're told to flee youthful, get rid of it before it hatches and becomes something major. When it starts to rear its ugly head, flee it then. Don't let it dwell with you too much, or you might end up in a position kind of like Jonah. Look at Ephesians chapter 5. Verses 8, beginning at verse 8. Ephesians 5:8. "For ye were sometimes darkness, but now ye are light in the Lord. Walk as children of light. For the fruit of the Spirit is in all goodness and righteousness and truth, proving what is acceptable unto the Lord. And have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather reprove them. For it is a shame even to speak of those things which are done of them in secret. But all things that are reproved are made manifest by the light, for whatsoever doth make manifest is light. Wherefore he saith, Awake thou that sleepest, and arise from the dead, and Christ shall give thee light." You see, it kind of lulls you into this same sort of sleep that Jonah was in. If you're not constantly trying to do the right thing, you just kind of lull into this stuff, and you become insensitive to it. Look at 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. Beginning at verse 4. "But ye, brethren, are not in darkness, that day should overtake you as a thief. Ye are all the children of light and the children of the day. We are not of the night nor of darkness. Therefore, let us not sleep as do others, but let us watch and be sober. For they that sleep, sleep in the night, and they that be drunken are drunken in the night." We're told not to sleep, but stay awake. Now, I think we're running up against the time here, so I'll make a couple of quick points, and then we'll close for this morning and pick this back up again next week, Lord willing. One of the things that we're going to see is that these mariners, they called upon various deities in hopes of securing a deliverance. Whatever God you got, just tell us who it is. We'll pray to him. What do you got to do with this God? How do we get this God to do something, or that one? How do we do so they believed that there was something that was controlling this, but they didn't know who, and they had no idea what. So they're calling upon various deities. It says in verse 5, then the mariners were afraid and cried every man unto his God and cast forth the wares that were in the ship into the sea. But obviously this is a merchant ship. The wares that were in it, that's the stuff that they were carrying to go back to Tarshish with. So they took the freight, if you will, and started throwing it overboard to lighten the ship. That's a pretty major storm. We run into the same type of a thing over in the book of Acts, where Paul ended up in that shipwreck, where they were actually in the middle of a hurricane, and one of the things that they did was they started throwing everything overboard to try to lighten the ship, to hopefully save the ship. So this was a major storm they were in. It wasn't something small. And so they start calling on all of these various deities, and then they approach Jonah, because he's asleep, so they want to find out who his God is. And what's interesting is that he who should have been reproving Nineveh about now was being reproved by a shipmaster. Shipmaster lets him have it for bringing this upon him. Now, I think we're up against the time here, so I'm going to stop here this morning, and then next week we're going to pick up with these last 2 points again and continue forward. And we've still got quite a bit to do just to get through chapter 1. So this might end up being more than 3 weeks. We'll see. We'll see when we get there. With that, I thank you for your very kind and patient attention this morning. Let's stand and be dismissed in prayer.